The Threx descended without warning, their colossal ships blotting out the sun. Earth's cities, once vibrant beacons of human progress, became nothing more than targets for the brutal alien onslaught. The invasion was swift, cataclysmic even. The Threx did not come for resources or conquest, but for annihilation. Their fleet was vast, their technology incomprehensible, and their resolve unwavering. For them, there was no question of victory, only the pace at which they would wipe humanity from existence. But humanity, in all its defiance, was not yet finished. Captain Ilara Kincaid stood on the bridge of the Crimson Titan, her eyes scanning the tactical display. The ship's hull was marred with battle scars, remnants of the ferocious defense against the initial wave of Threx invaders. It had been a massacre, a brutal, one-sided conflict that had left Earth's forces decimated. The Crimson Titan was humanity's final hope, the last of its kind. A warship born of the best minds and bloodied hands, forged in desperation. Ilara's knuckles whitened as she gripped the armrest of her command chair. The Threx had deployed orbital bombardment arrays, devastating entire continents, reducing cities to rubble. The air was thick with the sounds of chaos. Explosions, screams, and the ever-present hum of the ship's weapons as it fought to protect the few remaining human forces in space. The Crimson Titan was the only ship left capable of mounting a resistance. Yet even it could not hold forever. "Status report," Ilara ordered, her voice a controlled mixture of determination and calm, masking the terror that threatened to claw its way to the surface. Multiple Threx battalions moving in from the outer edges of the system. Captain, Lieutenant Jonas Rivera reported from his station. "We're looking at an armada. Their firepower, it's beyond anything we've ever seen. We can't hold them off forever." Ilara's eyes narrowed, a fierce determination igniting within her. "We don't have forever. We have to act. Now." A low hum pulsed through the ship as the tactical map zoomed in on the Threx flagship, an enormous, blackened monolith looming at the center of the fleet. It was the heart of their invasion, and it radiated power. No fleet had ever dared to challenge the Threx directly, not with such overwhelming force. Yet Ilara wasn't the kind of leader who would cower in the face of impossible odds. She was a captain forged in the fires of humanity's last desperate battles. If anyone could turn the tide, it was her. "We need to infiltrate the Threx flagship," Ilara said, her voice sharp and unwavering. "It's their command center. Take it down, and we can cripple their forces." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the bridge crew, but it was short-lived. Ilara was not one to offer false hope. If she said it could be done, they would follow her to the ends of the earth, or what was left of it. "How?" Rivera asked, his voice laced with both fear and admiration. "We exploit their weakness," Ilara replied, tapping a series of coordinates into the console in front of her. "Their flagship's energy field is vulnerable at the lower levels. We can slip through their defenses, undetected, if we're careful." The crew exchanged nervous glances. The mission seemed impossible, a suicide run that no one would ever expect to survive. But they had no choice. "You all know what's at stake," Ilara continued, her gaze locking onto each of her crew members. "We fight for Earth, for our people. This is our last shot. We take that flagship down, and we show them that humanity's not done yet." A silence fell over the bridge. Ilara could feel the weight of her words settle over the crew like a heavy shroud, but it was the kind of weight they could bear. Their defiance was the only thing keeping them from falling into hopelessness. One by one, the crew nodded in agreement, steeling themselves for the battle to come. "Ilara," Rivera said, his voice softer now, "we don't have the firepower to go up against that beast. The Crimson Titan is all we've got." "That's all we need," she said, her voice steady. "We may not have the numbers, but we have the will. We're humanity's last line of defense, and we're going to make them regret underestimating us." The ship rumbled as the engines powered up, and Ilara felt her pulse quicken. The Crimson Titan had been built to be more than just a weapon. It was a symbol, a testament to humanity's strength. The crew trusted her to lead them into the unknown, and with everything hanging in the balance, she would not falter. "Prepare for departure," Ilara commanded. "This is our fight, and we will see it through. We're going to end this together." The crew of the Crimson Titan moved with purpose, ready for the battle that would determine humanity's fate. The ship, though battered and weary, roared to life as they set course for the Threx flagship. And in that moment, they all knew the fight for Earth had only just begun. The Crimson Titan shot forward, cutting through the vast emptiness of space as it hurtled toward the Threx fleet. On the bridge, the crew was silent, each member acutely aware of the danger they were about to face. The hum of the engines vibrated through the ship, the sound of life, or death, depending on how the next few minutes unfolded. Ilara stood at the center of the command deck, her eyes fixed on the flickering tactical display. The Threx flagship loomed ahead, a monolithic mass of dark metal that seemed to swallow the light. Around it, the alien fleet moved like a swarm of locusts, each ship more menacing than the last. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and yet Ilara felt the familiar fire of defiance stir in her chest. She would not go down without a fight. "Status on enemy movements," she asked, her voice sharp but steady. "Threx ships are closing in, Captain," Lieutenant Rivera replied, his hands moving rapidly across the console. "They've detected our approach. The moment we're in range, they'll open fire. We won't have long." Ilara nodded, her mind racing. There was no time for hesitation. She had only one shot at this. The vulnerability in the flagship's energy shield was their only hope. It was a narrow window, a fraction of a second, where their weapons could bypass the defenses and strike at the heart of the Threx command. But to reach that moment, they would have to breach the outer lines first. "Helm full speed ahead," Ilara ordered, her eyes never leaving the screen. "Brace for impact. Rivera, I want every available gun firing on my mark." "Aye, Captain," Rivera responded, his voice unwavering. The Crimson Titan surged forward, its weapons coming to life in a dazzling display of light as they blasted through the incoming Threx fighters. The alien ships scattered in an attempt to regroup, but the Titan's rapid, unpredictable maneuvers kept them off balance. The ship's crew, trained for moments like this, worked in perfect synchronization, each member filling their role with precision. Ilara's pulse quickened as the enemy ships closed in. Her fingers hovered above the command console, ready to give the order. They were entering the kill zone. One mistake, one misstep, and the Titan would be reduced to debris. "Mark," Ilara shouted. The Crimson Titan unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, sending a wave of destruction through the alien formations. The Threx ships retaliated instantly, their plasma cannons lighting up the void. Explosions erupted all around the Titan, and the ship rocked violently, but it held together. "Ilara," Rivera called out urgently. "The flagship's shields are reinforcing. We need to get closer, now, or we lose our chance." Without hesitation, Ilara made a split-second decision. "All power to the engines. We're going in." The Titan lurched forward, weaving between Threx ships, using the chaos of battle to cover its advance. Enemy fire rained down on them, but the ship's advanced shielding absorbed the blows. The crew braced themselves as the ship maneuvered through the crossfire, every inch gaining them ground toward the flagship. "Captain," Lieutenant Darius, the tactical officer, spoke up, his voice tight with tension. "We're approaching the flagship's lower defense grid. One shot is all we have." The tactical map pulsed with urgency. The energy field around the flagship shimmered, a layer of protection so powerful that most ships couldn't even get close without being torn apart. But Ilara had studied the Threx designs for years, and she knew exactly where their shield was weakest, right at the lower hull. If they could exploit that momentary gap, it would be their chance to strike. "Helm, get us into position," Ilara commanded, her voice a cutting edge of determination. With a skill that only the most seasoned of pilots possessed, the Titan swooped low, dodging another wave of Threx fighters that attempted to close in on them. The ship shuddered as an explosion rocked its port side, but the crew remained focused. "We're in range," Rivera called out. "On your mark, Captain." Ilara took a breath, her mind clearing. This was it. They could either win or die here. Fire. The Crimson Titan's cannons roared to life once more, sending a concentrated energy blast directly at the flagship's weak spot. Time seemed to slow as the beam of light cut through the darkness of space, a brilliant streak of hope and defiance. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, the flagship's energy field flickered and cracked, just as Ilara had predicted. The blast punched through the gap, slamming into the heart of the Threx ship's lower hull. The flagship trembled under the impact, its shield sputtering as sparks flew from the breached area. But the battle was far from over. The Threx flagship retaliated, sending a cascade of deadly fire toward the Titan. Ilara's heart raced as the ship rocked violently, her crew scrambling to maintain control. "Get us out of here," Ilara barked. Full reverse. Now, the Crimson Titan pulled away from the flagship's fury, but the damage had been done. The flagship was vulnerable. The countdown to their final assault had begun. The Crimson Titan veered sharply to the left, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma rounds that exploded into the space they had occupied just seconds before. Sparks flew across the bridge as the ship's shielding absorbed the strike. But the Titan was already damaged, its hull groaning under the strain. Ilara felt a brief, sharp pang of fear, then squashed it. There was no room for doubt now. There was no retreat. "Damage report," she barked. "Port side shields are down to 15%, Captain." Lieutenant Rivera called out from the helm, his hands dancing across the controls. "Hull integrity compromised, especially in the aft. We've lost maneuvering thrusters." "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Ilara commanded, her eyes never leaving the tactical display. "Keep us moving. We can't let them pin us down." On the main screen, the Threx fleet appeared like a wall of ironclad death, an unyielding mass of alien ships closing in on the Titan. The flagship, though wounded, had begun to recover from the initial breach. Its defenses were reinforcing, a thickening barrier of energy wrapping around it like a shield of fire. Their moment of opportunity was fading fast. But Ilara knew one thing. If they didn't act now, Earth would fall. "We've got a window of 10 minutes, tops," Lieutenant Darius reported from Tactical. "After that, they'll have us cornered. We need to board the flagship, Captain. Now." Ilara's jaw clenched. She knew what he was implying. The Crimson Titan could never survive another full-scale assault. They needed to act quickly if they were going to stand a chance of infiltrating the flagship. "Deploy boarding pods," Ilara ordered, voice steady despite the raging storm outside. "Get us inside their ship." The crew worked with grim precision. The Titan shuddered as 4 sleek boarding pods were launched from its belly, cutting through space toward the crippled Threx flagship. Ilara watched the pods on the monitor, her pulse quickening as they approached their target. The pods were designed to be stealthy, to slip through cracks in the enemy's defenses like ghosts, bypassing their radar and weapon systems. "Pods are away. ETA to target. 90 seconds, Darius reported. The tension on the bridge was palpable. The Threx didn't expect human ingenuity, didn't understand that when humanity was pushed to the brink, it fought with a fierceness unlike any other species. As the pods drew closer, the flagship fired its cannons in a desperate attempt to stop them, but the Titan's evasive maneuvers kept them from taking direct hits. Suddenly, a violent lurch threw Ilara against the console as a massive explosion rocked the Titan. The ship's hull trembled, alarms blaring as the outer shields flickered and died. A harsh, metallic screech rang out, and the bridge lights flickered before dimming. "We've been hit. Starboard side, reactor core breach imminent," shouted Ensign Kiera, her voice cracking. Ilara's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to let fear rule her. "Status on the boarding pods," she demanded. "Pods are on target," Darius replied, his voice filled with tension. "They're in. Impact on the flagship's lower hull. We've breached their outer defenses." "Good," Ilara said, though her mind was racing. "Now we need to hold off this assault long enough to finish the job." The Threx fleet closed in even further, their ships circling the Titan, cutting off any chance of escape. The Titan fired back with what remained of its weapons, but they were weakened, their energy reserves draining quickly under the relentless assault. The Threx forces pressed harder, their plasma weapons scoring direct hits against the Titan's shields, shattering sections of the hull. "Engineering report," Ilara shouted. "Power levels are critical, Captain," Chief Engineer Owen said, his voice trained. "We're operating at less than 30%. The starboard fusion reactor is on the verge of collapse. We can't keep this up much longer." "Do what you can," Ilara ordered. "We need to stay in the fight long enough to get the crew inside the flagship." "We'll make it, Captain," Owens replied, determination in his voice. Ilara turned her attention to the screen, watching as the boarding pods breached the Threx flagship's interior. The crew had a limited window of opportunity. The flagship's defenses would be swift to adapt, and once the breach was discovered, the Threx would flood the corridors with overwhelming forces. Her mind flicked back to the mission. Eliminate the heart of the Threx military. The flagship's command center was where the Threx's unyielding war effort began. But in the depths of the ship, another enemy awaited. Threx soldiers, augmented, terrifying beings, patrolled the corridors like predators in search of prey. No human had ever set foot on a Threx warship and survived to tell the tale. As the last of the pods made contact with the flagship, Ilara turned to the crew. "We have one shot. We get in, we take out their command, and we cripple their ability to fight. Then we get out, no matter the cost." "Understood." The crew, bloody but resolute, nodded in unison. They had signed up for this fight. They had chosen this path because they believed, deep down, that humanity would not, be erased. "Prepare for the worst," Ilara said grimly. "Let's show them what happens when you mess with the human spirit." The countdown to chaos had begun. The Crimson Titan groaned as another series of plasma blasts rained down, shaking the ship violently. The hull shuddered, and alarms blared across the bridge. But Ilara's focus was fixed on the task at hand. Her crew was already preparing for the most dangerous phase of the mission. The boarding pods had breached the Threx flagship, but the real battle had only just begun. "Pods have successfully infiltrated the flagship's lower levels," Lieutenant Darius reported. "We've compromised their hull. Now it's up to our people to fight their way to the heart of the ship." Ilara nodded sharply. "Get a secure comm link with the boarding team. I want to know the status of our people on the ground." A moment later, a crackling voice came through the comms. It was Commander Ashford, the leader of the boarding team. The static cleared, and the voice sounded strained but determined. "Ilara, we've made it inside. We're pushing through the lower decks. Resistance is fierce. These Threx, they're like nothing we've encountered before." Ilara gripped the armrest of her chair. "How much longer until you reach the command center?" "We're about 2 levels down, Captain. We'll be there soon, but it's getting worse. These Threx soldiers, they're tougher than we expected. We've lost 2 men already." Her gut twisted at the news. Humanity's soldiers were the best trained, but the Threx warriors had been genetically altered, designed for war in ways that defied human understanding. They were massive, with armored exoskeletons and a ruthlessness that made them nearly impossible to stop once they got close. "Ilara," Ashford's voice was grim. "We've spotted something big. It's like a command unit, but it's not human. We're dealing with something else in here. It's heading our way. Fast." Ilara's mind raced. The Threx had created monsters. They were not just soldiers. They were a species designed to crush humanity's resistance, and now one of them was coming for her people. Understood, Ilara said, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Keep moving. If you can't fight it, get out of its way. I want that command center, Ashford. It's the only way we win this. There was a brief pause before Ashford's voice came through again, more determined than before. We'll get it done, Captain. For Earth. Ilara ended the communication with a sharp click. Her crew had already seen the odds stacked against them, but their resolve was what made humanity dangerous. The Threx had underestimated that. They'd underestimated the power of human unity and the sheer will to survive. Engineering, status on the reactor. Ilara asked, needing to keep everything in balance. Reactor's holding, Captain, but it's a matter of time. We've got about 15 minutes before we lose full functionality. Owens replied. Once we're on full standby, we won't be able to maintain fire support. That was the grim truth. The Titan had been built for speed and strength, but not for an extended siege. They were fighting a war on borrowed time, and every minute that passed could be their last. I'm giving you the order now, Ilara said, her voice resolute. All crew, prepare for boarding extraction. If we don't take the flagship's command center in the next few minutes, we pull back. We'll survive to fight another day. The crew nodded, accepting the harsh reality. It was not what they wanted to hear, but survival was a constant in war, and the Titan would fight until its last breath. On the flagship's surface, the boarding team continued their advance, blasting through Threx corridors with precision. They'd planted explosives in key locations along their path, and every corner turned could lead them to the next wave of enemy soldiers. The deeper they went, the closer they came to the heart of the Threx war effort, and the more desperate their situation became. Suddenly, a thunderous roar echoed through the corridors. Ashford's voice crackled through the comms again, frantic this time. Captain, we've got contact. The thing we saw, it's here. It's like nothing we've ever faced. A beast. A monster. It's... The comms cut off abruptly. Ilara's eyes widened as the bridge fell into a heavy silence. Her crew exchanged glances, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. They're in trouble, Ilara murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Captain, Rigorous said, his voice tight with concern, we can't wait. We need to act now. Ilara gritted her teeth. She was running out of time. If Ashford's team couldn't hold their ground, they would lose the flagship and humanity's last chance. We push forward. We're going in, Ilara decided, rising from her chair. Prepare for immediate assault. Engineering, prepare to give us everything you've got left. We're making a run for it. The ship's remaining thrusters fired as the Titan turned to face the enemy once more. It would be their final assault, everything riding on their ability to breach the flagship's heart and destroy it before they were overwhelmed. With nothing left to lose, Ilara led her crew into the heart of the Threx war machine. The Crimson Titan lurched forward, its remaining engines stringing to push the ship toward the heart of the Threx flagship. Every moment felt like an eternity. They were fighting not just for survival, but for humanity's future. Ilara's hands gripped the armrests of her command chair, her mind locked on the mission. She had made a promise to her crew, and now that promise would be put to the ultimate test. We're closing in on the flagship's command center, Lieutenant Darius reported, his voice a calm contrast to the chaos surrounding them. Another 30 seconds, Captain. We'll be in range for a direct assault. Prepare boarding teams, Ilara ordered. If we're going to make this count, we need to take their command center by force. We can't afford to waste time. The crew moved with military precision, securing their positions and preparing the weapons. Ilara's mind, however, kept drifting to Ashford's last transmission. The creature they had encountered inside the ship, a beast that seemed to be both alien and something more, something engineered for war, was more than just a soldier. It was a symbol of everything the Threx had done to erase humanity's will to fight. The creature was a weapon, but it was also a warning. The Threx had created monsters to crush any hope humanity had left. "Captain, we've received a distress signal from the boarding team," Darius said, his voice tense. "Ashford's team is pinned down. They've encountered the creature. It's unstoppable." Ilara's eyes narrowed. The sound of the signal was strained, a desperate plea that cut through the static, barely audible. "We're on our way," Ilara said. She turned to her crew. "Prepare for combat. We break in now or lose everything." The Titan's weapon systems activated once more as it fired its remaining volleys at the Threx ships, creating a diversion just long enough for them to make their move. The battle around them continued to rage, but Ilara knew that the real fight was just inside the flagship. The final push was now or never. "Launch assault pods," Ilara ordered. The sleek pods detached from the Titan's belly, zooming through the void toward the breach in the flagship's outer hull. Inside each pod, a group of humanity's finest soldiers, armed to the teeth and fueled by the will to win, prepared for the ultimate fight. As the pods made their descent into the flagship, Ilara's mind raced. She thought of her family, of the millions on Earth who had trusted her and the Titan to keep them safe. There was no turning back now. "We've made contact with the flagship's inner hull," Darius reported, his voice filled with urgency. "Pod teams are disembarking." Ilara's breath hitched as the sound of weapons fire and explosions crackled through the comms. Her heart pounded in her chest. The Threx were everywhere. The creature, whatever it was more than just a beast. It was a nightmare made flesh, a creature designed to rend and tear through human soldiers like paper. The Titan's assault on the command center had already begun, but the soldiers inside would need every ounce of humanity's resolve to overcome the horror waiting for them. "I'm in position." Commander Ashford's voice finally came through, ragged and strained. "We're about 100 meters from the command center. But the creature, damn it, it's closing in. It's unstoppable. If we don't stop it now, we'll never reach the heart of the ship." Ilara could hear the sound of gunfire in the background, the unmistakable crackle of energy weapons being discharged in a desperate bid to hold off the creature. Ashford's voice cut through, unwavering despite the chaos. "We need backup, Ilara. This thing, it's too strong. It's tearing us apart. I don't think we can." The comms cut off. "No," Ilara muttered under her breath. "We are not losing them." "Captain, we've got incoming enemy reinforcements," Lieutenant Rivera said urgently. "We're being swarmed." Ilara's eyes blazed with fury. She would not let her crew die for nothing. She would not allow the Threx to erase them from the universe. "We push forward," she declared, her voice steel. "All units, to the command center. We are not backing down. For humanity." The Titan fired again, launching a barrage of deadly energy beams at the Threx fleet in a final bid to break their hold. As the crew scrambled to regain control of the situation, Ilara's mind was consumed by one thought. She needed to reach Ashford and his team before it was too late. The creature inside the ship was a monster of unimaginable power, but Ilara knew something the Threx did not. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its technology, its weapons, or its ships. It was in its will, in its refusal to accept defeat. The Threx had built monsters to try and crush humanity's spirit, but they had failed to understand the most powerful force in the universe, the human will to survive. "Prepare for direct assault," Ilara commanded. "All units, execute on my mark." With one final, thunderous roar from the Titan's weapons, the crew launched themselves into the heart of the Threx warship. The last battle had begun. The corridors of the Threx flagship were eerily silent, save for the sound of boots on metal and the occasional distant echo of weapons fire. The assault team, led by Commander Ashford, moved like a unit of ghosts, their breath heavy in the cold air as they pressed forward. The creature was close now, too close, and they could feel its presence in every creak of the ship's bones. The walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if the ship itself was alive and aware of the battle raging within. "Hold position," Ashford whispered, his voice harsh and low. "We've got about 20 meters to cover before we reach the command center. But that thing—" He paused, eyeing the shadows warily. "I don't know how much longer we can hold out." The rest of the team nodded, grim determination etched into their faces. The soldiers were all seasoned veterans, trained to face the unimaginable. But this was something else. The Threx had engineered this creature to be the perfect hunter, a blend of alien strength and unrelenting violence, a weapon designed to obliterate anything standing in its path. They had already lost half their number in the fight to reach this point. The creature had torn through the boarding party with terrifying efficiency, leaving nothing but shredded bodies and mangled equipment in its wake. But Ashford had pushed on, knowing the mission was bigger than any one of them. The fate of humanity depended on them succeeding. "We don't have time," Ashford muttered under his breath, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We need to end this now." Suddenly, the air shifted. A low growl reverberated through the metal walls, vibrating the very air around them. It was the creature. They had no more time to wait. "Move out," Ashford shouted, his voice booming in the enclosed space. The soldiers surged forward, sprinting toward the command center. They had to move quickly before the beast closed in on them completely. The door to the command center was only a few meters away, but already they could hear the creature's claws scraping against the floor, its massive body pushing through the ship like an unstoppable force. "Get to the door," Ashford commanded. "We've got to lock it down." The team reached the door and began setting explosives on the lock. Their fingers worked with practiced speed, despite the tension in the air. They knew what was at stake. As the countdown began on the explosives, Ashford turned to face the team. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice hard. "The command center is our key to winning this. Get inside, hold the line, and eliminate anything that moves." Before they could react, the door exploded open, and a massive figure emerged from the shadows. The creature was here. It stood over 8 feet tall, its skin a patchwork of organic armor and grotesque alien flesh. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural red hue, and its mouth opened wide to reveal rows of serrated teeth, dripping with the remnants of its previous victims. It was more than just a monster. It was the embodiment of the Threx's cruelty, their desire to create life for one purpose: destruction. "Open fire," Ashford yelled. The soldiers unleashed a hailstorm of bullets, energy blasts, and explosives. But the creature barely flinched. Its armored hide absorbed the fire, and with a terrifying roar, it charged forward, sending soldiers flying with brutal force. Ashford's heart pounded in his chest as he watched his team struggle to hold the line. The creature's strength was overwhelming. No matter how much they hit it, it seemed to shrug off the pain, an unstoppable force of nature. But Ashford's will was unbreakable. He had to push forward. Humanity had come too far, had blood too much, to fail now. "Hold them off," Ashford shouted to his team. "I'm going for the command center." The soldiers fought valiantly, their weapons sparking with energy as they clashed with the creature. But Ashford was already moving toward the heart of the room, towards the control panel. His eyes burned with a fierce determination. If they were going to win, they had to cut the head off the servant. The creature was powerful, but the heart of the flagship, the control center, held the key to its destruction. He reached the console and began to key in the override code, praying that the system would respond. The ship had been built with redundancy, layers upon layers of security. But Ashford was confident. Humanity's technology might not be as advanced as the Threx's, but they had a resilience, a drive that no alien weapon could anticipate. The countdown began on the screen in front of him. The ship's systems were shutting down, and the countdown to self-destruction had started. Ashford's heart raced as the creature's growl grew louder behind him. "Almost there," Ashford muttered under his breath. "Come on, come on." A violent tremor shook the room as the creature surged forward, slamming into the soldiers who had been holding it back. Ashford turned just in time to see one of his men thrown into the wall with a sickening crunch. "No," Ashford shouted. He grabbed the last explosive charge and hurled it directly at the creature. The explosion knocked it back, but it wasn't enough to stop it. The countdown hit 0. The entire ship shuddered. A massive explosion rocked the flagship as the reactor core went critical. The creature let out a final deafening roar before the walls of the command center exploded outward, consumed by the fury of the blast. The explosion tore through the flagship, sending shockwaves that rattled the Crimson Titan and shook every crew member to their core. For a brief, terrifying moment, Ilara's entire universe seemed to collapse around her. The command center had been hit, and with it, the last hope of taking down the Threx war machine. But then, a blinding light erupted from the center of the flagship, signaling that the reactor core had gone critical. Ilara felt the heat through the viewing ports of the bridge as the massive ship shuddered one last time. The light was bright, like the birth of a new star, and then the darkness followed, as the flagship's energy imploded upon itself. "Captain," Lieutenant Darius said, his voice barely audible over the ringing in Ilara's ears. "The flagship it's gone. I know," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the turmoil. Her eyes were locked on the massive cloud of fire and debris that had once been the Threx flagship. The battle was over. They had won, but not without a cost. "Commence a damage report," Ilara ordered, pushing aside the emotions that threatened to rise within her. "How bad is it?" The crew scrambled to assess the damage, their voices urgent but focused. The Titan had taken heavy damage from the Threx counterattacks and the shockwave of the flagship's destruction, but it was still operational. That was all that mattered. Humanity had survived, and now they needed to regroup. "Reactor is stable," Captain Rivera reported. "We've sustained hull breaches in several areas, but we can still function. The Titan is holding together." "Casualty report?" Ilara asked, her heart heavy with the thought of the lives lost. "We've lost over 30% of the crew," Darius said. "Many of the casualties are from the boarding teams. Ashford's group, they're gone." Ilara closed her eyes for a moment. Commander Ashford had been one of her closest allies, a brilliant strategist, and a man who had given everything for the cause. He had led the charge into the heart of the Threx flagship, and though they had succeeded, it had come at the cost of his life, and the lives of so many others. "They gave everything," Ilara said softly. "Their sacrifice will not be forgotten." The bridge fell silent, the weight of their loss settling over them like a heavy fog. But even in the shadow of grief, Ilara knew there could be no time for mourning. There was still work to do, and humanity's fight was far from over. "Alert the fleet," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We've destroyed the flagship, but the Threx won't stop. We've struck a blow, but we must remain vigilant. Humanity's future depends on us staying united." Darius nodded grimly. "Understood, Captain." Ilara turned her gaze to the view screen once more. The Threx flagship was nothing but a smoldering wreck in the distance. The massive cloud of destruction was slowly beginning to dissipate, revealing the vast expanse of space beyond. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Ilara allowed herself a breath of relief. But that relief was fleeting. The Threx would retaliate, of that she was certain. This battle was a victory, but the war was far from over. Humanity had won this battle with blood, sweat, and unyielding determination, but the galaxy was a vast, hostile place. There would be more enemies, more battles, and humanity would need to rise to every challenge. Ilara's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden communication. The signal was weak, crackling through the bridge's comm system. "Ilara." The voice was strained, barely audible, but Ilara recognized it immediately. "Ashford," she said, her heart leaping in her chest. It was impossible. Ashford had been at the heart of the blast. The voice came again, more faint now. "We're alive, Ilara," We're alive. Ilara's eyes widened as the comms signal stabilized. The last remnants of Ashford's team, what few were left, had somehow survived the explosion, having taken refuge in a reinforced chamber deep within the flagship. Against all odds, they had lived. The creature, the final enemy, had been destroyed along with the command center, but it had taken everything from them. Ashford, we thought you were gone, Ilara said, her voice trembling slightly. We lost many good men and women, but we're not done yet. Ashford's voice was raspy, but there was strength in it. We've secured the intel we need. The Threx are not finished, but neither are we. We'll rebuild. We'll continue the fight. Humanity stands, Ilara, and we stand together. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, though she refused to let them fall. The war was not over, but the human spirit had been tested, and it had not broken. They had faced the impossible, and they had emerged victorious. We'll honor their sacrifice, Ilara said, her voice resolute. For Earth. For humanity. A renewed sense of purpose filled her as she looked out at the burning remains of the Threx flagship. The battle had been brutal, but the victory was sweet. And now, humanity's greatest challenge lay ahead. Ensuring that the Threx, and any other threat to their existence, would never again rise to challenge them. Ilara. Ashford's voice interrupted her thoughts, bringing her back to the moment. There's more we need to discuss. This fight isn't over. Not yet. Ilara stood straighter, her resolve hardening once more. The fight had only just begun. Ilara's grip tightened on the edge of the command chair, her eyes never leaving the screen. The battle had raged for what felt like a lifetime, but the end was not yet in sight. The Threx might have lost their flagship, but their war against humanity was far from over. The fleet was regrouping, and though their forces had taken a serious blow, Ilara knew the Threx would never simply surrender. We're receiving their transmission, Darius reported, his voice steady but tinged with tension. They're sending a surrender request. Ilara's brow furrowed. The Threx surrendering. She couldn't trust it, not after everything they had done to her people. Hold off on any responses, she ordered. Let's see what they have to say. The message came through, crackling with static. The face of a high-ranking Threx officer appeared on the screen, a creature with cold, calculating eyes. Its voice echoed in the tense silence. Captain Ilara, we acknowledge your victory, the Threx officer said, its tone measured but edged with the remnants of arrogance. The destruction of our flagship has wounded us, but it has not broken us. This war was inevitable, and you have won a battle. But there are more of us. You have no idea the forces we still command. Ilara's heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. I don't need to know, she said coolly. What matters is this. Humanity is still standing. Your best soldiers are dead. Your flagship is a pile of debris. And Earth is still here, ready to fight until the end. You'll never break us. The Threx officer's eyes narrowed. You misunderstand. This was never about defeating humanity. This was about extinction. We will rise again. You can't stop what has already begun. You have only delayed the inevitable. Ilara's gaze hardened. The Threx had underestimated humanity from the beginning. They had thought their superior technology and monstrous weapons would erase them. But now they were learning the truth. Humanity's spirit, the will to survive, had carried them through. Then let's finish this, Ilara said, her voice sharp, unwavering. The fight ends when we say it does. If you think you can bring extinction to Earth, you'll have to go through us first. And we'll make sure you never get the chance to try again. The officer's expression twisted with frustration. So be it, it hissed. You have sealed your fate. The screen went black, the message cut off abruptly. Ilara sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was it. The Threx were not going to surrender. They were going to regroup, and soon they would be launching an even more brutal campaign to finish what they had started. The war was far from over, but they had won a decisive victory. The balance had shifted, and humanity had proved its resilience. "Ilara, we've intercepted their fleets," Darius said, his voice grave. "They're retreating, at least for now. They're regrouping in the outer colonies, but they're not giving up. They've got reinforcements on the way." Ilara nodded. The Threx were preparing for one final push. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. There was no going back. This was humanity's moment to either rise or fall, and Ilara would make sure that humanity would rise. "Alert the fleet. Prepare for the final assault," she ordered, her voice firm. "We will not wait for them to make the next move. We strike now, before they can gather their forces. We'll bring the fight to them." The crew sprang into action, the Titan humming with renewed energy as its systems powered up for the final offensive. Humanity had come so far. They had endured against overwhelming odds, faced unimaginable horrors, and yet they were still standing. Now they had a chance to finally drive the Threx back, to end this war once and for all. As the Crimson Titan and the remaining human fleet set their course for the outer colonies, Ilara stood tall, resolute in her conviction. They had fought for Earth, they had fought for each other, and now they would fight to the very end. The Threx had awakened humanity's greatest strength, their unity, their determination, and their refusal to be extinguished. And that strength would drive them forward into the final battle. The war was not over, but the Threx had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity. Ilara turned her gaze to the stars ahead. The war would end on their terms, for humanity, for Earth, and for the future.